The following story is one of the strangest murder mysteries that is still puzzling investigators to this day. But it's the supernatural elements surrounding this case that make it so compelling. Is it possible for someone to solve their own murder from beyond the grave? Maybe. If you're drawn to the dark and creepy corners of true crime or those stories that have become legend, well, you've come to the right place. I'm Sav, and if you're new here, hit subscribe because I bring you a new video and a new story every single week. Let's get into tonight's case. So tonight's story begins in Chicago on February 21st, 1977. There's a woman named Teresita Basa. She's 47 years old, originally from the Philippines. She came to the US back in the 1960s because she wanted to study music, specifically piano, and she was legitimately talented. She actually taught the neighborhood kids how to play piano for free just because she enjoyed doing it. She was also working towards a doctorate in music on the side. But music doesn't always pay the bills, so her day job was as a respiratory therapist at Edgewater Hospital in Chicago. But Teresita is quiet. She goes to work, she comes home, she plays piano, she studies. She doesn't have drama, she doesn't have enemies. She's the kind of person you'd describe as nice and genuinely mean it. So on the night of February 21st, Teresita finishes her shift at the hospital and goes home to her apartment. She lives on the 15th floor of a high-rise style building in the Lincoln Park area. She has dinner, and around 7:10 p.m. she gets a phone call from a friend. They chat for about 20 minutes, mostly about selling tickets to an upcoming event, and then around 7:30 she gets another phone call, this time from a woman named Ruth. They talk for about 20 minutes, and during the conversation, Teresita mentions she's expecting a male visitor to come by. She doesn't say who, she doesn't say why, she just says that someone's coming over and she needs to go. At some point during that call, there's a knock at her door. She tells her friend that she has to hang up, and that's the last time anyone heard from Teresita. About an hour later, around 8:40 p.m., neighbors on the 15th floor start smelling smoke. So they alert the building's maintenance man, who goes to Teresita's door. He bangs on the door and there's no answer. Eventually, firefighters arrive on site and gain entry into the apartment. Inside, the apartment is absolutely full of smoke. Things are tossed around, drawers are open, stuff is scattered. It looks pretty ransacked. And in the middle of it, underneath a burning mattress, they find Teresita. She's on the floor, half undressed, and there's a butcher knife from her own kitchen buried in her chest. Now, the first thing cops think when they see a woman with no clothes stabbed in a trashed apartment is this must have been some kind of sexual assault that turned into murder. But when the autopsy comes back, there's no evidence of any sexual assault at all, which means that whoever did this deliberately stripped her down and staged the scene to make it look like a crime of passion. The fire was also deemed to have been set on purpose. The perpetrator probably hoped the whole apartment would go up and take the evidence with it. But the neighbors smelled the smoke early and the firefighters got there in time before it could spread. So now the cops have a dead woman with no enemies, a staged crime scene, a fire meant to destroy evidence, and basically nothing else. No witnesses saw anyone come or go from the 15th floor. There were no fingerprints that led anywhere useful, no DNA or camera footage because this is 1977, and DNA evidence in criminal cases wouldn't even be a thing for about another decade. The one thing they do find is a small handwritten note in Teresita's apartment. It says, "Get tickets for the initials AS." They don't know who AS is. They can't connect those initials to anyone in Teresita's known circle. So it goes into the evidence file and stays there. Weeks go by, then months. Detectives are assigned to the case, and they're grinding through interviews with coworkers, friends, family, basically anyone that knew her. They get nothing solid, and every lead they chase eventually goes cold. And by the summer of 1977, the case is essentially dead. 6 months of investigating with no suspects and no motives. It's becoming one of those files that sits in a drawer and just collects dust, just another unsolved murder in a big city. And then something happens that no one could have predicted. The Evanston Police Department calls Chicago PD, and they say, "We've got a couple here, a doctor and his wife. They live in Skokie. They have information about one of your cold cases, a murder involving an employee at Edgewater Hospital. The name they keep bringing up is Alan Showery." Now, detectives hear that name and something clicks. AS, the initials from the note, could be Alan Showery. So they go to meet this couple. The husband is Dr. Jose Chua, a surgeon who works at Edgewater Hospital, and his wife, Remy. She's also a respiratory therapist at Edgewater, same department as Teresita. Now, Dr. Chua sits down with the detectives, and he's clearly uncomfortable. He tells them up front that he knows how this is going to sound. He didn't even want to come in, and he waited months because he didn't want to look foolish. But then he tells them what's been happening. He says that for months now, his wife Remy has been having these episodes Apparently it started out as bad dreams with vivid nightmares about Teresita, but then it changed. Remy would fall into these trance-like states, usually in the evening hours, and her voice would shift. Her tone, her cadence, the way she spoke, it would all become different. And in that state, she would say things. And according to Dr. Chua, during one of these trances, his wife looked at him and said, "Doctor, I would like to ask for your help. The man who murdered me is still at large." But she was speaking Tagalog, which is the native language of the Philippines, which wasn't impossible considering that Remy herself was Filipino and she knew the language, but combined with everything else was odd to say the least. So Dr. Chua asked Remy who was speaking, and she said, "I am Teresita Basa." Put yourself in this guy's shoes. He's a surgeon, a man of science. His wife is in bed speaking in a voice that isn't hers, claiming to be a dead coworker. His first instinct is not to call the police. His first instinct is that something was really wrong with his wife. But it didn't stop. It happened again and again, 3 separate times exactly according to Dr. Chua, and each time the voice gets more specific. It names Alan Showery, an orderly at Edgewater Hospital, as the killer. It says that Showery came to Teresita's apartment that night to fix her television, and while she had her back turned, he attacked her. He stabbed her and tossed her apartment and made it look like a sexual assault, stole what he could find, and set the house on fire to cover his tracks. But here's where it gets really hard to explain away. The voice doesn't just name the killer, it says Showery stole specific pieces of jewelry from the apartment, a pearl ring and a jade pendant. The voice also says that these were family heirlooms and pieces that had been purchased in France and originally belonged to Teresita's mother. And then Remy gives the names and phone numbers of 4 people, which were family members and friends of Teresita, who could identify those specific pieces of jewelry if the police found them. And if that weren't enough, the voice also confirmed where the jewelry was right now. Apparently, Showery gave the pieces to his girlfriend as a late Christmas present. And when Remy finally comes out of these states, she doesn't remember anything. So the detectives are sitting across from Dr. Chua and they're processing all of this. On one hand, it sounds insane. On the other hand, they have a cold case with 0 leads, and this man just handed them a name, a motive, a method, stolen property, and a way to verify all of it. So they decide to look into it. They pull records, and it turns out that Alan Showery does in fact exist. He does in fact work at Edgewater. He is an orderly. He did know Teresita, and in fact, he had been to her apartment. She would tip him for helping her run errands and small tasks around the apartment. So he knew where she lived, and he had reason to be there. So they bring Showery in. At first he says, yeah, he was supposed to go and fix Teresita's TV that night, but he never actually went because he didn't have the right tools. He says he stayed home. Then they go talk to his girlfriend. They ask about the jewelry, and she shows them the pendant and the ring that Showery gave to her. She says that they were late Christmas gifts from Showery. The detectives then contact the people whose names that Remy provided. They describe the jewelry, and those people confirmed, yes, those pieces did in fact belong to Teresita. So now the walls are closing in. The detectives go back to Showery with the jewelry confirmation, and his story starts falling apart. He changes details, he starts contradicting himself, and eventually he breaks. He admits to the murder and signs a confession. In the confession, he admits that he went to the apartment and attacked her. He staged the scene. He took what little he could find, $22 in cash and the jewelry, because he needed money to pay for rent. Then he lit the fire and left. Case closed. Not quite, because now it goes to trial. And at trial, Showery does a complete 180. He takes back his confession. He says the detectives fed him the details. He says they threatened to arrest his pregnant girlfriend on murder charges if he didn't cooperate. He says he was coerced. His defense attorney argues that the entire case is built on the word of a woman who claims she was possessed by a ghost. And that's the entire foundation of the case. Without Remy's visions, the police never look at Showery, they never find the jewelry, they never get the confession. So the lawyers argued that the testimony of a ghost is not evidence. The trial is then dubbed The Voice from the Grave by the press. It runs for about 5 days, and the prosecution calls 13 witnesses. Remy and Dr. Jose actually end up testifying as a witness for the defense, because the defense wants to put this ghost possession story front and center and make the jury think this is ridiculous. Showery presents an alibi and says he had dinner with his girlfriend that night and that they went to a neighbor's place around 7:30 p.m. to drink and play darts. The jury then deliberates and they can't agree. It's a deadlock jury that results in a mistrial. Showery is very close to walking free. His lawyers are telling him to sit tight, we'll beat it at retrial, the ghost angle is too weird for a jury to convict on, you have a real shot at getting off. And then on February 22nd, 1979, almost exactly 2 years to the date after Teresita was murdered, Alan Showery walks into a courtroom and pleads guilty. He went against his attorney's advice advice. He didn't ask for a deal, just guilty. Nobody fully knows why. Some people say his lawyers told him a second jury might not be as kind, so he gambled on a lighter sentence. Some people say the weight of what he did finally caught up to him. And some people, the ones who lean into the stranger side of this story, say that Showery himself started to believe that after sitting through a trial where a woman described being possessed by his victim, after hearing the details he knew were true come out of someone who shouldn't have possibly known them, maybe he thought Teresita really was still there. Maybe he thought she wouldn't stop. He was then sentenced to 14 years, the minimum for murder at the time, plus 4 concurrent years for arson and burglary. He was sent to Stateville Penitentiary, and he was paroled in July of 1983. He served roughly 4.5 years of total time. Last anyone tracked him, he had moved back home to New York, and he's believed to be alive somewhere in his late 70s. Now, if you believe in the paranormal and spirit possession, this is a pretty cut and dry case. But for others, there are still some serious lingering questions. If Remy was not possessed by Teresita, why did she act as though she was? Did she just happen to know something that would implicate her in the crime? Was she involved somehow? These questions will likely never get answers. But what do you think? Does Remy know more than she's letting on? Or did a murdered woman possess another to solve her own crime from beyond the grave? If you enjoyed that story, click the link here and I'll tell you all about the curious case of Delamar Vera. That is indeed a wild story. This is NiteOwl. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.